She moved quietly through the room, careful not to make any noise that would draw attention to her. The sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and soft music filled the air. But she stayed focused on her work. Her steps were light, almost invisible, as she carried a tray from one table to another. People passed by her without really seeing her, like she was just another part of the place. The hall was full of well-dressed guests. Expensive outfits, bright smiles, and confident voices surrounded her from every side. Everyone seemed to belong there. Everyone except her. She kept her eyes down most of the time, not out of fear, but out of habit. It was easier that way. When people didn't notice you, they didn't ask questions. She had learned that long ago. Her day had started early, before the sun had fully risen. She had ironed her simple uniform carefully, making sure it was clean and neat. It didn't matter that no one paid much attention. She still believed in doing things properly. It was one of the few things she could control. By the time she arrived at the venue, the preparations were already in full swing. Decorations were being adjusted, lights were being tested, and staff moved quickly from one place to another. She joined in without saying much, doing exactly what was asked of her. Make sure the glasses are placed evenly. Check the tables again. Stay alert when guests arrive. She nodded each time, quietly completing every task. As the evening began, the place slowly transformed. What was once just a large hall became something beautiful. Soft golden lights filled the space, and the decorations gave it a warm and welcoming feeling. It was the kind of place people came to celebrate, to show happiness, and sometimes to show off. She stood near one corner for a moment, watching as the first guests entered. Their voices were full of excitement. Some greeted each other warmly, while others laughed loudly, already enjoying the night. She took a small breath and stepped back into her role, moving quickly to serve drinks. No one noticed how carefully she balanced each tray. No one saw how steady her hands were. But that was fine. She wasn't there to be seen. Still, every now and then, her eyes would drift toward the piano. It stood near the center of the hall, shining under the soft lights. It wasn't being used yet, but it added a touch of elegance to the room. Most people didn't pay much attention to it. To them, it was just part of the decoration. But to her, it was something else. For a brief moment, as she passed by it, her steps slowed. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the tray she was holding. She didn't stop, but her eyes lingered just a second longer than usual. Then she moved on. The night continued, growing louder and more lively with each passing hour. Guests filled the tables, conversations grew deeper, and laughter became stronger. She moved between them, always careful, always quiet. At one table, a group of people spoke loudly, joking with each other in a way that made everyone around them turn their heads. They seemed to enjoy being the center of attention. One of them made a playful comment about the event, and the others laughed instantly. She approached them with a polite expression, placing drinks gently in front of each person. One of them barely looked at her, simply taking the glass and continuing the conversation. Another gave a quick glance and nodded, as if she were just doing what she was supposed to do. She didn't mind. She had seen this many times before. As she walked away, she heard someone say, "These events are always the same, but at least the service is decent." The others laughed again. She didn't turn back. She didn't react. She just kept walking. There was a rhythm to her movements, almost like she was following an invisible pattern. Step, serve, turn, walk. Over and over again. It was simple, predictable, and safe. But inside her, things were not always so quiet. There were memories she didn't speak about, moments from her past that still lived somewhere deep within her. They weren't loud, but they were there, waiting. Sometimes, when she was alone, she would think about them. Not with sadness, but with a quiet feeling she couldn't fully explain. A memory of sitting in front of something familiar. A memory of sound filling a room. A memory of feeling alive. But those thoughts didn't belong here, so she pushed them away and continued working. At one point, she was asked to bring a fresh set of glasses from the storage room. It was quieter there, away from the noise of the guests. As she walked in, she allowed herself a small pause. The silence felt different, almost comforting. She placed the tray down and took a deep breath. For a second, she closed her eyes. Then, without thinking, her fingers lightly tapped against the edge of the table. 1, 2, 3, a soft rhythm. She stopped suddenly, as if catching herself doing something she shouldn't. She looked around quickly, even though she knew she was alone. Then she picked up the glasses and returned to the hall. The music playing in the background changed, becoming softer, more elegant. Some guests turned their attention toward the center of the room, where a small space had been cleared. It seemed like something more formal might happen soon. She continued her work, but her awareness shifted slightly. She noticed more now, the tone of voices, the change in mood, the way people began to settle into their seats. And once again her eyes found the piano. Still stood there, untouched, waiting. She walked past it again, this time a little slower. The lights reflected off its surface, making it shine even more. For a brief second, she imagined what it would feel like to sit there, to place her hands on the keys, to let the sound flow. But just as quickly the thought disappeared. That wasn't her place anymore. A voice called her name, pulling her back to reality. She turned immediately and walked toward the direction of the sound. Another task, another request. She responded the same way she always did, calm, polite, and focused. The night was far from over. More guests arrived, and the energy in the room continued to rise. Conversations blended together, creating a constant hum of sound. The atmosphere felt full, almost overwhelming, but she moved through it with ease. No one noticed the way her eyes occasionally returned to the piano. No one noticed the quiet tension in her fingers when she passed by it. And no one knew that behind her calm and simple presence, there was something more, something waiting, something that had been silent for a long time, but not gone. As she stood near the side of the room for a brief moment, holding a tray and waiting for the next request, she looked at the guests around her. They were smiling, laughing, enjoying themselves without a care. To them, this was just another night, just another event, just another moment of fun. But for her, something felt different. She couldn't explain it, but there was a strange feeling in her chest. Not fear, not worry, something else. Something like a quiet pull. Like the night was slowly moving toward something unexpected. She adjusted her grip on the tray and took a small breath. Then she stepped forward again, disappearing back into the movement of the room. Unnoticed, for now. The night had fully settled in, and the hall now felt alive in a different way. The early calm had disappeared, replaced by a louder, more confident energy. People were no longer just arriving. They were relaxed, comfortable, and ready to enjoy themselves without holding back. Conversations overlapped, laughter came more freely, and the atmosphere felt warm but slightly careless. She continued moving through the room, just as she had before. Tray in hand, step steady, expression calm. But now the requests came faster. Another drink here. Excuse me? Can you clear this? Over here, please. She nodded each time, never rushing, never showing stress. Even when the voices became impatient or slightly demanding, she kept the same tone. Soft, polite, controlled. At one table, the same group from earlier had grown even louder. Their jokes had become more playful, and their confidence more noticeable. They leaned back in their chairs, speaking freely, as if the entire space belonged to them. She approached again, placing fresh glasses carefully. One of them looked at her this time, really looked, but only for a second. "Hey!" the person said casually with a half-smile. "You've been working all night, huh?" She gave a small nod. "Yes. Must be tiring," another voice added, though it didn't sound like real concern. It sounded more like a passing comment. She didn't respond. She simply adjusted the tray and turned to leave. But then someone else spoke, louder this time, almost joking. "You look like you could use a break." A few of them chuckled. She paused, unsure if she was expected to answer. Before she could decide, another voice joined in. "Yeah, why don't you sit down for a second?" The tone was playful, but there was something else hidden in it, something slightly teasing. More laughter followed. She gave a small, polite smile, the kind that didn't fully reach her eyes. I'm fine, thank you. She turned again, ready to move on, but the conversation didn't end. Wait, one of them said, leaning forward slightly. Actually, I've got an idea. The others looked interested immediately. What idea? That piano over there. They pointed toward the center of the hall. Has anyone even used it tonight? The group turned to look. The piano still stood untouched, shining under the soft lights. I don't think so, someone replied. Another person laughed lightly. What's the point of having it then? There was a brief pause. Then the same voice spoke again, now with a playful tone that carried just a hint of challenge. Why don't we ask her to play something? A few people laughed instantly. Her? Someone said, clearly amused. Yeah, why not? The first person continued, smiling. It'll be fun. The group exchanged looks, entertained by the idea. She stood still for a moment, not fully understanding what they meant. Then one of them turned directly toward her. Hey, they said, gesturing lightly. Can you play the piano? The question caught her off guard. For a second, she didn't answer. She hesitated, unsure of what to say. It's okay. Another voice jumped in quickly, laughing. We're not asking for a concert or anything. Just something simple. Yeah, someone added. Just an easy tune. Nothing complicated. More quiet laughter followed. Their tone wasn't harsh, but it wasn't serious either. To them, it was just a joke. A way to pass time. Something different to entertain themselves. She felt their eyes on her, waiting. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the tray. I don't think I should, she said softly. Why not? One of them asked immediately. Come on, it'll be fun. Yeah, we're just asking for something small, another added. It's just a piano, someone else laughed. How hard can it be? The group chuckled again. She looked down for a moment. Her mind suddenly filled with thoughts she hadn't allowed herself to feel all evening. The noise of the room seemed to fade slightly, replaced by something quieter inside her. She hadn't expected this. Not here. Not like this. I really should get back to work, she said gently, trying to keep her voice steady. But they weren't ready to let it go. Oh, come on, the first voice insisted. We'll tell them you're helping us. Just a minute. It's not a big deal, someone else added. Yeah, don't worry so much, another voice said casually. The group leaned in slightly, their attention fully on her now. Around them, a few nearby guests had started to notice the conversation. Not clearly, but enough to feel that something different was happening. She felt it. The attention. The expectation. It made her uneasy. But beneath that feeling, there was something else. Something older. Something she hadn't touched in a long time. Her eyes slowly lifted, almost without thinking, and once again, they found the piano. It stood there quietly, just as it had all night, waiting. Her heart gave a small, unexpected reaction. For a moment, she remembered something. Not clearly, not fully, but enough to feel it. The weight of her hands on keys. The sound filling a quiet room. The feeling of being somewhere else entirely. She quickly pushed the thought away. This wasn't the same. This was different. This was not her world anymore. Just something easy. One of them repeated, softer this time, but still smiling. The word easy stayed in her mind for a second. Easy. They said it so lightly, like it meant nothing, like it was simple. She took a small breath. She started, then stopped. She wasn't sure what she was about to say. Her mind told her to walk away, to return to her work, to stay in the role she understood. But her feet didn't move. The group watched her, curious now, not expecting much, not thinking much of it, just waiting. Finally, she spoke again, her voice quiet but clear. I haven't played in a long time. There was a brief silence. Then someone smiled. That's okay. We're not judging. A few soft laughs followed. Yeah, another added. Even better. Makes it more interesting. Their words were light, almost careless. But something in her chest shifted. Not strongly, not loudly, Just enough. She looked down at her hands for a moment, then back at the piano, then back at them. Her thoughts felt mixed, uncertain, pulling her in different directions. She knew she could say no. She had every right to, but something about the moment felt different. Like the night was slowly changing direction. Like this small, simple request wasn't as small as it seemed. The room around her continued moving. Voices, music, laughter. But in her mind, everything felt slightly slower, more focused, more real. She adjusted her grip on the tray again. Then, without fully deciding, she placed it gently on the nearby table. The group noticed immediately. "Oh," one of them said, a smile growing. "She's actually going to do it." A few others leaned back, clearly entertained now. "All right, this should be good," someone joked. Their tone still carried that same light amusement. They didn't expect anything serious. They didn't expect anything memorable. Just a quick moment of fun. But she wasn't thinking about them anymore. Not fully. Her attention had shifted. Her steps, slow at first, began to move. One step, then another. Each step felt heavier than it should have, not because of fear, but because of something deeper. Something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. The distance between her and the piano wasn't far, but it felt longer. As she walked, a few more people began to notice. The movement, the direction, the change. Some conversations softened slightly as eyes followed her. Curiosity spread quietly through the room. She reached the piano and stopped. For a second, she didn't move. She simply stood there, looking at it. Up close, it felt different. More real, more powerful. Her reflection faintly showed on its surface. She could hear her own breathing now. Soft, uneven. She slowly lifted her hand, hesitating just before touching it. Then, gently, her fingers brushed against the edge. A small contact. But it was enough. Something inside her shifted again. Not loudly, but clearly. Behind her, the room had grown quieter. Not silent, but quieter. People were watching now. Not all of them, but enough. The group who had asked her sat comfortably, still smiling, still expecting something light, something simple. They leaned forward slightly, waiting. She pulled the bench back just enough and sat down carefully. Her movements were calm, but inside, her thoughts were far from steady. Her hands rested in her lap for a moment. Then slowly, she lifted them, hovering just above the keys. Not touching yet, just feeling. The distance between her fingers and the piano was small, but it held years of silence, years of distance, years of something left behind. The room seemed to hold its breath without realizing it. And in that quiet moment, just before anything began, no one truly knew what was about to happen. Her fingers hovered just above the keys, close enough to feel the smooth surface, but not touching yet. The room behind her had gone quieter, though no one had asked for silence. It happened naturally, like people sensed something was about to begin. She could hear small sounds now that were hidden before. The faint clink of a glass being set down, a chair shifting slightly, someone clearing their throat. But all of it felt distant, like it didn't belong to her anymore. Right now, everything in her world was in front of her. The piano, her hands, and the space between them. She slowly took a breath, deeper than before, trying to steady the thoughts running through her mind. It had been so long, too long. She wasn't even sure if her hands would remember what to do. For a second, doubt tried to take over. What if she made a mistake? What if nothing came out the way she remembered? What if they laughed? Her fingers trembled slightly. Then she closed her eyes, just for a moment. And in that moment, something changed. The noise, the people, the pressure, it all faded away. In its place came something quieter, something familiar. A memory not clear like a picture, but strong enough to feel. A younger version of herself, sitting in front of a piano. Not in a grand hall, but in a small, simple room. The light coming through a window. The sound of practice over and over again. Mistakes, corrections, patience. A voice guiding her gently. Again. Slower. Feel it. Don't rush it. Her fingers had once known this world so well. And maybe they still did. She opened her eyes. Her hands lowered. And then she pressed the first key. The note was soft, but it was clear. It didn't shake. It didn't break. Came out exactly as it should. A few people in the room straightened slightly, surprised that she had actually begun. She pressed another key, then another. The notes were simple at first, slow and careful, like someone testing the water before stepping in. Her fingers moved gently, almost cautiously, as if asking themselves if this was real. The group behind her watched with small smiles. "This is nice," one of them whispered quietly. Another nodded, still relaxed. "Yeah, simple." They weren't impressed yet. They didn't expect to be. But she wasn't focused on them. Her eyes rested softly on the keys, her breathing slowly evening out. With each note, something inside her settled. The nervousness didn't disappear completely, but it softened, making space for something else. Something steadier. Her fingers moved again, this time a little more smoothly. The pauses between notes became shorter. The hesitation faded just slightly. It was still gentle, still quiet, but there was a small change. A shift. The melody began to take shape. Not random. Not unsure. Intentional. A few more people turned their heads now, their attention slowly drawn toward the sound. Conversations near the piano lowered in volume. Not completely silent, but softer, as if people didn't want to interrupt. She didn't rush. She let each note land. Let each sound breathe. And slowly, without forcing it, her hands began to remember. The movement became more natural, less thought, more feeling. Her fingers no longer hovered between notes. They flowed. Left hand steady, right hand light. Together, they created something that felt whole. Behind her, the group that had asked her to play shifted slightly in their seats. Their smiles hadn't disappeared, but they had changed. They were paying attention now, not just watching, listening. One of them leaned forward a little, eyes narrowing in quiet curiosity. "This," they murmured almost to themselves. Another didn't respond, but their expression grew more focused. She continued playing. The music slowly grew richer, deeper, carrying more emotion with each passing second. It was no longer just a simple tune. It had layers now, a softness but also strength beneath it. Her shoulders relaxed. Her hands moved freely, and something inside her opened. The sound filled the space in a way no background music had all evening. It didn't fight for attention. It didn't demand it. It simply existed, and people began to notice. More heads turned. More voices quieted. Even those who were far from the piano felt the shift in the room. The energy changed, though no one could explain exactly how. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. A couple standing near the back stopped mid-conversation, their attention drifting toward the center. A server passing by slowed slightly, glancing over with curiosity. Someone near the doorway paused before stepping out, drawn back by the sound. She didn't see any of it. Her world had narrowed again. Not in the same way as before, but in a deeper, calmer way. She wasn't thinking about who was watching. She wasn't thinking about what they expected. She was just playing. And in that moment, she wasn't the quiet worker moving between tables. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't unnoticed. She was something else entirely. Her fingers moved with confidence now. Not forced. Not rehearsed. Natural. The melody rose slightly, then softened again, like it was telling a story without words. There was feeling in it. Something gentle, but also something strong. Something that came from somewhere real. The group behind her no longer whispered. They were silent. One of them sat back slowly, their earlier amusement gone. Another watched closely, their expression unreadable now. This wasn't what they had expected. Not even close. One person crossed their arms, not out of disinterest, but out of focus, like they were trying to understand what they were hearing. "She said she hasn't played in a long time," someone finally whispered. No one answered, because it didn't sound like that. Not at all. The music continued, growing slightly more expressive, more confident. Her hands moved faster now, but still controlled, still precise. There was no panic, no rush, just flow. The kind that couldn't be faked. The kind that came from something real. A man standing nearby slowly set his drink down, his eyes fixed on her hands. A woman beside him tilted her head slightly, listening more carefully now. Even the staff began to notice. Small glances turned into longer looks. Something was happening, and everyone could feel it. She leaned into the music slightly, her posture changing without effort. It wasn't dramatic, but it showed something, connection, maybe. A quiet understanding between her and the instrument in front of her. Like they were no longer separate. Like they belonged together. The notes carried through the room, touching different corners, reaching people who hadn't even realized they were listening. And still, she didn't look up. She didn't need to, because for the first time that night, she wasn't thinking about being seen. She was simply being. And the room was slowly beginning to understand that. The melody shifted again, becoming softer, almost reflective. It felt like a pause, not an end, but a moment to breathe. The kind of moment that made people lean in without realizing it. The kind that held attention without asking for it. The kind that made silence feel natural. And in that silence, everyone was listening now. Not smiling, not laughing, just listening. Because what had started as something easy was no longer simple at all. And it was only just beginning. The soft pause in the melody did not last long. It felt like the music itself was taking a breath, gathering something deeper before moving forward. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys for a brief second, then began again. This time with more confidence, more emotion, and something stronger behind every note. The change was clear. What had started as gentle and careful now carried weight. Not loud, not overwhelming, but fuller. Each note seemed to mean something. Each movement of her hands felt sure, like she was no longer questioning herself. The room felt it instantly. People who had only been casually listening before now stood still. Conversations that had been quietly continuing faded away without anyone asking them to stop. Even those who had tried to keep talking found themselves losing focus, their words trailing off as the music pulled their attention back. Near the center, a couple who had been laughing earlier now sat quietly, their smiles gone, replaced by a look of quiet surprise. Someone at the back of the room took a few steps closer, not wanting to miss what was happening. A server holding a tray paused for longer than they should have, completely distracted. It wasn't just music anymore. Felt like something personal. Her hands moved across the keys with a natural flow now. No hesitation, no pause. The rhythm was steady, but alive. It rose and fell gently, like a conversation that didn't need words. There was feeling in it. Not something obvious or dramatic, but something real. A quiet kind of emotion that didn't ask for attention, yet held it completely. The group who had first asked her to play sat in stillness. Their earlier expressions, amusement, curiosity, light teasing, had disappeared. Now there was something else in their faces. Focus. One of them leaned forward slowly, resting their elbows on the table, eyes fixed on her hands. Another sat back, but their gaze didn't move away for even a second. Someone else pressed their lips together slightly, as if trying to process what they were hearing. No one spoke. No one joked. The idea that this was just for fun had faded. This was not what they had expected. Not even close. She continued playing, unaware of how deeply the room had changed. Or maybe she knew. But it didn't matter anymore. She wasn't playing for them now. She was playing because something inside her had finally opened. The melody grew richer, weaving together moments of softness and strength. Her left hand carried a steady foundation, while her right moved with a kind of freedom that felt almost effortless. There was a balance, quiet control, and behind it all, something deeper, memory, not clear, not fully formed, but present. Her mind drifted slightly as her hands continued moving, guided more by feeling than thought. Small moments from her past surfaced, not as full memories, but as flashes of sensation. The feeling of sitting at a piano long ago, the sound of repeated practice, the quiet frustration of getting something wrong, the small satisfaction of getting it right, a voice reminding her to slow down, to listen, to feel. She didn't think about how long it had been since she had touched a piano. She didn't think about why she had stopped. Those thoughts stayed somewhere far away. Right now, there was only this, the music, the moment, and the quiet connection she had almost forgotten existed. The melody shifted again, becoming more expressive. There was a gentle rise in intensity, not sudden, not forced, but natural, like a story reaching a turning point. A few people in the room reacted without even realizing it. Someone's shoulders lifted slightly. Another person's eyes widened just a bit. A soft breath escaped from someone standing nearby. They weren't just hearing the music. They were feeling it. Even those who knew nothing about piano, nothing about technique or skill, could sense that this was something rare, something honest, something real. Near the front, one of the guests slowly shook their head, almost in disbelief. They glanced at the person beside them, but no words came out. There was nothing simple to say. Another person quietly moved their glass aside, as if even that small movement felt too loud now. The room had become still, not forced, not controlled, just still. And at the center of it all, she played on. Her posture had changed slightly, more relaxed now, more natural. Her shoulders no longer held tension. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the music, steady and calm. Her fingers moved faster for a moment, then softened again, creating a contrast that felt alive. It wasn't perfect in a technical sense, maybe, but it didn't need to be. It was real, and that made it more powerful than anything perfect could ever be. The group behind her exchanged quick glances, but said nothing. Their earlier confidence had shifted into something quieter. Respect. Not loud, not spoken, but there. One of them finally leaned closer to another and whispered, barely audible, "This isn't just easy." The other gave a small nod, eyes still locked on her hands. They understood now, or at least they were beginning to. The sound filled the hall, reaching even the far corners where a few guests had remained distant from the main activity. One of them, who had been preparing to leave, stopped near the exit and turned back fully, drawn in by the music. A staff member near the wall stood still, forgetting their task completely. Time felt different, slower, more focused, like the entire room had stepped into a quiet pause together. The melody softened again, but this time it carried something deeper, something reflective, almost like it was telling a story without needing words. There was a gentle sadness in it, but also warmth. Not heavy, not overwhelming, just enough to be felt. Her expression remained calm, but there was something in her eyes now. Not visible to everyone, but if someone looked closely, they would see it. A quiet emotion, not for the room, not for the audience, but for herself. Her hands slowed slightly, letting each note stretch just a little longer. The sound lingered in the air, filling the silence in a way that felt complete. No one moved. No one interrupted. The moment held. And for the first time that night, people weren't thinking about where they were, or who they were with, or what they looked like. They were simply present, listening, feeling, witnessing something they had not expected to experience. The group who had asked her to play no longer leaned back in their chairs. They sat upright now, fully engaged, as if missing even a single note would matter. Their earlier smiles had been replaced by something quieter, something more thoughtful. The meaning of their simple request had changed completely. It wasn't a joke anymore. It wasn't entertainment. It had become something else entirely. And slowly, without anyone saying it out loud, they realized they had been wrong about her. Very wrong. But she didn't know that. She didn't need to, because she was still lost in the music, her hands moving gently, confidently, as if they had never forgotten what to do. And as the melody continued to unfold, carrying more depth with every passing second, the room remained silent, completely taken by something they could no longer ignore. The music continued to flow through the room, steady and full of feeling. By now, no one was distracted anymore. The laughter from earlier in the night had completely disappeared. The casual energy had turned into something deeper, something quieter. Every person in the hall seemed to be connected to the same moment. She didn't rush. She didn't try to impress. She simply played. Each note came naturally, like it had been waiting for this moment to be heard again. Her hands moved with ease now. No hesitation left. The uncertainty from earlier had faded completely. What remained was something calm and strong. But while the room listened, something else was happening quietly in the background. Near one of the tables, a guest who had arrived late leaned slightly toward a staff member standing beside them. Their voice was low, careful not to disturb the silence. "Who is she?" they whispered. The staff member glanced toward the piano, then back again. They looked unsure at first, like they didn't have the full answer. "She works here," they replied softly. The guest frowned slightly, clearly not satisfied. "I can see that," they said. "But that's not what I mean." The staff member hesitated, then lowered their voice even more. "I heard something, not from here, but from someone who worked with her before," they said quietly. The guest leaned closer, interested now. "What kind of something?" The staff member paused for a second, choosing their words carefully. "They said she didn't always do this kind of work," they explained. "A long time ago, she was learning music, not just casually, properly. With training." The guest's expression changed. "Training?" they repeated. The staff member nodded slightly. "Yes, from what I was told, she spent years practicing. It wasn't just a hobby. It was serious." The guest looked back at her, watching her hands move across the keys with even more attention now. "Then what happened?" they asked. The staff member gave a small, uncertain shrug. "Life, I think," they said quietly. "I don't know all the details, but something changed." "She stopped." "Stopped?" the guest asked, surprised. Another soft nod. "That's what I heard." The guest didn't speak again. They simply turned their full attention back to the piano, but now their expression carried something different. Understanding, maybe, or even a quiet respect. Across the room, similar conversations began to happen. Soft whispers, curious glances, people trying to understand how someone like her, someone they had barely noticed before, could play like this. One person leaned toward another and said quietly, "There's no way this is just someone trying for fun." Another replied, "No, this comes from somewhere deeper." The music itself seemed to support those thoughts. It had grown more expressive, more personal. There were moments where it felt soft and reflective, and others where it carried a quiet strength. It wasn't loud, but it filled the space completely. At one table, a guest who had been silent for most of the performance finally spoke. "She's not just playing," they said quietly. "She's remembering." The person beside them didn't respond, but their eyes stayed fixed on her. Felt true. There was something in the way she played that didn't feel new. It didn't feel like someone trying to show skill. Felt like something returning. Something that had been part of her for a long time. Something she had once lived with every day. And now, somehow, it had found its way back. Her face remained calm, but there was a softness in her expression that hadn't been there before. Not a smile, not exactly, but something close. Something peaceful. Her fingers slowed slightly, letting the melody breathe. The notes stretched gently into the air, filling the silence with a quiet emotion that no one wanted to interrupt. The group who had first asked her to play sat in complete stillness. Their earlier confidence had disappeared completely. One of them looked down at the table for a moment, almost as if thinking back to what they had said before. The words "easy request" seemed very far away now. Another leaned back slowly, exhaling a quiet breath they didn't realize they had been holding. "This?" they whispered, barely audible. "This isn't normal." No one disagreed. They had expected a moment of light entertainment. Instead, they were witnessing something real. Something that made them think. Something that made them feel. And something that made them question their first impression of her. Across the room, a few people who had been standing slowly found seats, not wanting to miss a second. Others leaned against walls, their attention completely fixed. Even the staff moved more quietly now, careful not to disturb the moment. The music softened again, shifting into something more reflective. There was a gentle sadness in it now, but also warmth. It felt like a story being told without words. A story of something lost, but not forgotten. Her hands moved more slowly, each note placed with care. It wasn't about speed or complexity anymore. It was about feeling, about meaning, about something that couldn't be explained easily. Near the back of the room, the same guest who had asked about her earlier spoke again, this time almost to themselves. "People think they know someone just by looking," they said quietly. The staff member beside them didn't answer, but their expression showed they understood. The guest continued, still watching her. "But they don't see what's been left behind, or what's still there." There was no response. There didn't need to be, because everyone in the room was beginning to understand the same thing in their own way. She wasn't just a quiet worker. She wasn't just someone moving between tables. She was someone who had lived a different life. Someone who had carried something valuable inside her. And even though time had passed, even though her path had changed, that part of her had never truly disappeared. It had just been waiting for a moment like this. At the piano, she continued playing, unaware of the quiet conversations happening around her. Or maybe she was aware, but she didn't let it reach her. Her focus remained where it had been since the beginning. On the music, on the feeling, on the connection she had almost forgotten. Her breathing was steady now, her posture relaxed. Her hands moved with quiet confidence, guided not by thought, but by something deeper. The melody began to shift again, gently building toward something that felt like a closing. Not abrupt, not sudden, but natural, like a story reaching its final pages. The room seemed to sense it. People leaned in slightly, not wanting the moment to end. No one spoke. No one moved. They simply listened, because now they understood that this was not something they would see every day. Not something they could easily forget. And not something that had been easy at all. As the music carried forward, soft but full of meaning, one thing became clear to everyone in that room. They had been given a glimpse of something rare, something honest, something deeply human, and they would not see her the same way again. The melody slowly moved toward its end, but it did not feel rushed or forced. It felt natural, like a story finding its own quiet closing. Her fingers softened on the keys, allowing each note to linger just a little longer, as if she didn't want to let go too quickly. The room remained completely still. No one shifted in their seat. No one whispered. Even the smallest sounds, like a glass being touched or a chair moving, seemed to disappear. It was as if the entire space had agreed, without words, to protect this moment until the very end. Her hands slowed further. The final part of the melody carried something deeper than before. It wasn't just soft, it was meaningful. There was a quiet emotion in it that reached people in a way they didn't expect. Some felt calm. Some felt thoughtful. Some couldn't even explain what they were feeling. But they all felt something. And that was enough. Her breathing stayed steady as her fingers moved gently across the last few notes. There was no tension in her anymore. No hesitation. No doubt. Only presence. Only connection. The final note came softly. It didn't end with a dramatic sound. It didn't demand attention. It simply settled. And then, silence. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that feels full. For a few seconds, no one moved. No one reacted. It was as if the room needed time to understand that the music had ended. She kept her hands resting lightly on the keys for a moment, as if she, too, was not ready to let go completely. Then slowly, she lifted them and placed them gently in her lap. She took a small breath. And just like that, the moment was over. But something had changed. You could feel it. It was in the air. In the way people looked at her. In the way no one spoke right away. Then, from somewhere in the room, a single clap broke the silence. It was soft at first. Careful. Almost unsure. Then another followed. And another. Within seconds, the entire room filled with applause. Not loud in a chaotic way, but strong, steady, and full of respect. People stood up from their seats. Some slowly, some immediately, but they all joined in. The sound grew, filling the space just as the music had moments before. She looked up, slightly surprised. Not shocked, but not expecting this either. Her eyes moved across the room, seeing faces that had once ignored her, now looking at her with something completely different. Respect, admiration, even a little disbelief. The same group who had asked her to play were among the first to stand. Their expressions had changed the most. No smiles of amusement, no playful teasing, only quiet respect. One of them gave a small nod in her direction, as if acknowledging something they hadn't understood before. Another placed their hands together slowly, their applause steady, their eyes thoughtful. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to, because their reaction said enough. She stood up from the piano carefully, her movements still calm, still simple. She didn't try to hold onto the attention. She didn't bow or make a show of it. She simply stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The applause continued, but she wasn't used to this. She had spent so much time being unnoticed that this sudden attention felt unfamiliar, almost overwhelming. Her eyes lowered slightly, not out of discomfort, but out of humility. Then, after a brief pause, she gave a small, polite nod. Nothing more. And slowly, the applause began to soften. People sat back down, but the energy in the room had changed completely. It was no longer loud or careless. It was quieter now, more thoughtful, more aware. She stepped away from the piano, her steps the same as before, light, steady, quiet. But this time people noticed. As she passed by, a few guests gave her small nods of appreciation. One person offered a quiet, "That was beautiful." Another simply smiled in a way that felt genuine, not casual. She didn't stop. She didn't speak much. She simply returned to where she had been before, back to her work, back to the role she knew. She picked up a tray again, her hands steady, her expression calm. But something inside her had shifted, not in a loud or dramatic way, just quietly, like something that had been asleep had finally opened its eyes again. Across the room, conversations slowly began again. But they were different now. People spoke more softly, more thoughtfully. Some talked about the music. Some talked about her. But no one spoke in the same careless tone as before. Near one table, someone said quietly, "I didn't expect that at all." Another replied, "None of us did." A third added, "We shouldn't assume things so quickly." There was a pause after that, because everyone knew it was true. The group who had made the request sat together, quieter than before. One of them finally spoke, their voice low. "We thought it would be funny." Another nodded slightly. "Yeah, we were wrong." There was no laughter this time, no lightness, just honesty. They looked toward her as she moved through the room again, serving guests just like she had at the beginning of the night. But now she didn't look invisible. She didn't blend into the background. She stood out, not because she tried to, but because they now saw her differently, truly saw her. And that made all the difference. As the night slowly moved forward, the event continued. But something about it felt quieter, more grounded. The piano remained where it was. But now it didn't look like just a decoration. It looked like something meaningful, something that had revealed a truth, something that had changed the room. She passed by it once more, just as she had many times earlier. But this time, her steps didn't slow out of longing. They slowed for a different reason. A quiet acknowledgement, a small connection. Her fingers didn't reach out. She didn't stop. But there was a calm understanding in her eyes, like she knew something she hadn't fully known before. That part of her was still there. It had never left. Later, as the night began to come to an end, guests started leaving one by one. Some gave her a final nod or a quiet word before stepping out. Not everyone spoke, but the way they looked at her had changed. That was enough. When the hall slowly emptied and the noise faded away, she found herself alone for a moment. The lights were softer now. The space felt different without the crowd. She stood still, holding a tray in her hands, taking in the quiet. Her eyes moved once more toward the piano. Stood there, just as before. Silent. Waiting. But now it didn't feel distant. It didn't feel like something from another life. Felt close. Reachable. She didn't walk toward it. Not this time. She simply looked at it for a moment longer. Then took a small breath. And turned away. Because she knew something now. Something simple. Something important. That talent doesn't disappear just because life changes. That passion doesn't fade just because time passes. And that sometimes all it takes is one moment, one unexpected moment, to remind someone of who they truly are. She adjusted her grip on the tray and continued walking, her step steady, her expression calm. But inside, something had quietly come back to life. And this time, it wasn't going to be forgotten again.